Warning, this video is not sponsored or related to Wizard Comics or its affiliates. The views are of the cast and creators and do not reflect those of others. Furthermore, this video may or may not contain coarse language. You have been all equally warned. Hey guys, it's Will here with Wizard Comics. We're going into the third video in this series where we're going to go in depth now into what to expect at events, what's it going to be like, and some do's and do nots at events. So in our last two videos we went over heavily what to expect, how to find information, some extra advice about how to protect yourself and others, things like that. The basic core things to guarantee a successful event for you or your team. So now as we go into this, we're going to start with our first category in this video, which is going to be what to expect at events. So an event, it's going to be probably it's going to be in a building, maybe a hall, even in a small store, but usually it's going to be in some sort of indoor building. So for the winter time, this is really great because it's going to be warm. In the winter or in the summertime though, it might get really hot. So that's going to be some stuff we'll talk about here going into this spot here to expect. So just like in the photo, here's a prime example. This is the Warhammer communities page picture of a event that they run, I believe called Warhammer Fest. Yearly event, a lot of games. You can see here there's people with their models ready, they got their stuff on the side, they got their books, they're playing games, there's people on the side selling things that they can go and meet to. This is like one of your more larger events. So we're going to be talking about all sizes events in this video series. So going into it, and I'll stop rambling as I try to think things. We will go into the first thing. So let's just go through the day here. So when you start, you got all your stuff packed, you double checked it, even took photos or wrote down what you owned, got your party together, you got maybe breakfast, and what's the first thing you'll expect? Usually there'll be some a parking spot by the building you can go to. Large things, like especially halls, they'll have specific areas assigned for you where you can park and all that. So normally the first thing you'll expect when you go into a building is you'll see people kind of sitting around waiting for the event to start. So this would be a perfect time, usually about 30 minutes early. A lot of places, the date that they state when the time the event starts is when the event actually starts. So coming to the place 30 minutes beforehand will give the organizers and you time to properly sign in, find your seating. If you're playing with proxies and other stuff we'll talk into in the next videos, gives them a lot of time to check it so they're not rushed and maybe overloaded with stuff, which can maybe get them into a grumpy mood, which is not good for anyone because mistakes get made when you're grumpy and overworked. So that's the first section. Going into it is what do you expect throughout the day. There's going to be timers, you're going to have selected tables. Make sure you keep your eyes or ears out. A lot of these events will have papers with your opponents on it, or they'll have screens that tell you, even apps that you can look on your phone that are usually free to download for you as a player that you can use to kind of see who you're playing against. A lot of these events will be timed. They'll have a score sheet which will show here in the next parts, and all that sweetness of an event like that. And usually at the end of the day, they'll tell like what's going to happen. If it's a two-parter or even a week-long event, they'll tell you like what's going on, if you need to clean up your army, or if you need to pack and bring your stuff home. So all that stuff is basically what you'll expect at an event. You'll expect to meet your player, meet the TO. They'll usually have a introduction ceremony that they'll tell you what's going on, thank you guys for being there, what you're going to be playing. You're going to be expected as a player to make sure you know who you're playing against, that you know your rules, that you have your stuff that is required for playing, and that you just have a good time and a good experience for your opponent, even if they want to be a little bit of a dingus themselves. So this leads into our next topic here, which is going to be playing the event itself. So a lot of these events their main thing is that they are in rounds. So a round is basically a match or a set of matches that you and your opponent will play for a set amount of time for a score. Usually for MTGs like Magic, the big one, they have three rounds in a game, so best out of three. For Warhammer, it's a game per round, just because of the longer scale. Even Pokemon has one. For the most of them, have one round or one game per round. So that's the thing that in your documents, like in the last videos, we told you how to find, or even the TO will tell you at the events, is what you'll look for. And for those, you'll be using something called a score sheet, which I'll bring up here on the page. 1 second here. So this, guys, is a score sheet, or an example of an old one that we used a while ago, based off of I believe it was called Black Knight. They're a group of guys who run events in America. Check them out. We've borrowed their kind of example. This is like a test. So our finalized one is a lot different. So again, you'll find these in your documents for the event, along with the missions, because some events will actually have their own unique missions to the thing. So you won't be playing, or unique formats that you won't be playing out of the core rules of the game. So looking at this, we got categories, you got section for you and your opponent. You'll usually find in all these sheets, no matter what game, you'll find your score, your opponent's score, and a place to sign your name. By signing a paper, this is a big one. Make sure you double check with your opponent that you're verbally talking like, hey, so it was 2-1, right? Or it was like, oh, I think I tied that game. Did we tie? By doing this, you're double checking, because once you sign that piece of paper, and make sure your opponent signs, not just does like a swipe or their two initials. Like, they need to sign, because once you sign that, that is you saying that what is on the paper is correct. And a lot of these events, especially if they're running, say, with a homebrewed event reporter or one that's just starting, you can't go back on rounds. So once that has been set, it is set. So even in between rounds, you can also go up. If you found out you thought something's wrong, you can, before the round starts, you still have a little brief time to go up to a judge to warn them, hey, so we put it wrong. It was actually 2-0 for the game instead of 2-1. Or instead of 1-1 tied. And you might get a penalty or a talk to about this, because it is, as your player, your responsibility to keep the score. They'll be most likely able to fix it. So that's going to be the first part here for your scores. We're going to now sneak into the next photo here about playing events and cover that. So guys, moving into the next section here, as a recap, we talked about what to expect at an event, how the day is going to be laid out, what's it going to be like playing an event, and ending that, we're going to be going into the do's and do not section. But it's the last thing for playing an event. What you're going to expect is you're going to have your table, you're going to set up your game depending on your rules, you're going to meet your opponent, say your name, put your name on the paper, play your matches. When you're ready and done, you're going to sign your paper, make sure it's correct, and you're going to pack up your area, bring your stuff out, hand it to your judge or area that is for scoring. And even you might get a lunch break, or you can walk around the hall until they call out your names, or you check your phone on the app. So with that, we're going to go into the do's. We'll go into more detail in the next two videos, especially once we can go in detail, because they're going to be very game specific or genre specific. So we'll go into the do's right here. Start positive. So these are kind of like a more personal sort of list of what you should expect as a player, or even as an event runner, what we should expect for all players in the community. So just like we talked about in the first part, what to expect, arriving early. So arriving early is really good, again, because that gives you time to make sure you have everything, go meet your organizers, go meet the other players, talk for a bit, maybe eat some breakfast, pay your fees and your intros and all that stuff. then which then goes into meeting the staff. So usually they'll have like you can walk around, say, or they'll have like shirts, or maybe you just know them from your store. Say, hi, I'm here to play, I want to sign in, or I signed in, here's my list, check it. Or hey, like if you have a proxy or something, which we'll talk again into the next videos, what a proxy is, they can check it for you and say yes or no. This is also on the other side. You can see who's a judge and who's the TO. For all purposes, a TO is a tournament organizer. They're the guy who's put this together. They have final say. Don't be that guy and argue, which we'll talk about in the next section of this. And so that's basically that. They usually have some sort of like area that they'll call people over and they'll tell you what's going on. They'll say, hey, I'm blank. Thank you for coming to my event. We're going to be blah, 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 blah. And they'll label stuff. Make sure that you're there for that. That shows that you're dedicated to the playing area, that you want to have a good time. And this just guarantees that you know who will have final say in your fights, or if there's an argument or a rule problem. Next is I know is a hard topic for a lot of people, a sensitive subject, but and a lot of places don't want to talk about it. So I'm going to state here right now, this is my personal opinion, not related to any of the stores. If it helps, this was on a Wizards of the Coast player's guide poster that they sent us, and they sent to two Wizards, and they have sent this to all other game stores. So that's why I brought this on here. But going into it, hygiene and self-care. So if you're going to an event, especially say like if you live in a hot place, or if it's a summer and you're going to a big event hall that might not have the best or even any air conditioning, make sure you're bringing a water bottle. A lot of these places might have a tap or a water, like a water fountain that you can pour water into. Make sure you've like washed yourself, shaved if you need to. You're wearing the appropriate clothing, so like wear a sweater on a shirt, so that way if you get hot you can take the sweater off. Deodorants and stuff like that. Make sure your hair's been like combed back so it's not in your face or messed all over that place, so you're just kind of less distracting. And even if you keep your hair like combed back and stuff, it can help with, again, heating and cooling and stuff if you keep it tamed. And then lastly, self-care, in the sense that make sure you're eating when the appropriate times is to eat, or you brought your own food. Make sure if you say you have some sort of medical condition, you tell the judges what it is so they can prepare for this. Or they might, if say you can't stand for long times, they might bring you a chair. Or say if you have medical needs that you might have to go to the washroom because the thing that you might have to take for medicine is a little more intimate in a sense. They can set you up to a table that's more access to the washrooms and things like that. So on and so forth, the water bottle, things like that. Just make sure you're keeping care of yourselves, because we don't want to see one of our friends or a colleague who's having fun playing just drop and get really sick or badly injured or have to pause a game because we're more worried about their health than our game that's going on. And just no one wants it, and no one wants to see you get hurt. Or again, you also don't want to, on the other half, you don't want to get kicked out because someone started complaining that you smelled, or like, hey, you weren't keeping your area clean and eating food on the table that they were playing on. So with that, we're going to skip that. We're going to go back to the normal stuff here, which the whole eating thing leads into keeping your area clean. So I know for a lot of like card games, this is very easy. When you're going to a larger tournament, all you have is like your bag, which holds your food and your deck in it, and your playmat that you can just push between your feet, which I recommend. Don't put your bags on a chair or off in the distance. Place your stuff in the appropriate spot close to you where someone can't easily reach without you noticing, or in the appropriate assigned spots that judges will have. Which, again, that whole taking the photo of leads into protecting your stuff. And with larger games, I know with miniature games, a lot of places will have a dedicated table. I know at our store we have either the table in the back corner, it's a bright white table, you can't miss it, where you can put all your cases or your armies on if you need to deep strike. or we have the table that's across from the tiles that players can set their models on. Make sure you're not just crowding, like spread out everything. Try to keep everything compact. And a general rule I like to follow is keep a foam out on top of your case, because when a unit dies, put your stuff back in the case, or even stuff like that, like pull everything out, close all your case, just put them on top of the case. If you need to, the only people's feet that should be around the table, especially if you have a large tile that sticks out, should be you and your opponents. Just make sure that they know you're going to put your stuff underneath and your models are on top, so just watch their footing. And you can usually call a judge or something if people are around your stuff or that you think they're too close. Just call for a judge or something, or like as they're talking to your opponent, you can sneak over to a judge and like not be super obvious, like, hey judge, these guys are bugging me. You just be like, hey, walk over and be like, hey, so we have a problem at the table, can you please ask people to move, and then walk back. That's fine. So that's a general area for keeping your area clean. And the last few spots we've kind of talked about in the last few videos. Have all the things you need. So like in this meeting, make sure you have your rules with you if it's a different game that's not MTG. In that case, make sure you have your proper aretas accessible at all times. You have your life counter pad, you have your playmat set out, and if you're playing a miniature game or an RPG game, make sure you have your rule books to the side, your appropriate errata or FAQs for those, anything that may have changed in, like, say, a chapter approve or journal's handbook sort of idea, or yearly update book, and of course your dice, your miniatures, all that stuff to this ready to play. And the last ones here, your opponent's name. Just knowing your opponent's name and getting to know what they play and stuff would help you. One, it'll help you fill out the form in the future if they just kind of walk off, or they need to walk off due to something, or if you really liked playing them or playing at that store in the future, you might learning their names will help you kind of see who you're playing against next in the next few rounds. Or you might make a friend and come back and be like, hey, I liked playing against Jason, I want to play Jason again, is he in today? And that it can stuff like that. Just keep saying their name from time to time. Make it, like, don't make it super obvious like you're trying to learn. Just be like, naturally just use their name from time to time. Things like that. That'll help you just have a more better experience. It'll make them feel like you're actually caring about them and the game that they're playing and you're interested. Because I know, especially in those longer nights, it's going to get really, really busy and you're going to get tired, and it's just people are going to get grouchy. And then lastly, know when you have the right to call judge and when not to. So this is a big one, and it's going to be very, very personal to each person, their views on when this is a thing. So I'd say probably in this category, what it means to call a judge. So to call a judge when you go to an event is, a judge is, for all purposes, is a person who is a judicator, a person who knows the rules and lays them out when needed. So if you're playing a game and maybe someone skipped a unit in their phase and you caught it, and again, a lot of these games will have rules and set that if you or your opponent's not paying attention and something happens, you're either SOL or you and your opponent might get penalties because you should have been paying attention to the board scape. I know in a more casual, like at a smaller store, especially if you're playing with a lot of the returning players, they'll be a little bit more casual about it, but it's still a good sort of process to prepare yourself for keeping track of everything and keeping your mind, make sure you're watching what your opponent's doing and stuff. I know all the time there's going to be stuff all happening, you can't all 100%, but this also stops your opponent from trying to cheat if you're paying attention too, which can be a problem which we can talk about in a later future series. But so that's basically calling a judge. So to call a judge, you'd probably say if, like, your opponent forgot a unit to shoot and you caught it, or they may have moved wrong, you don't need to call a judge for that. That you can be like, hey, so I saw your guy moved a little bit further, I think they should move back, or hey, you forgot to shoot those guys, don't end your turn yet, you can shoot with them. That's something like that is when you don't need to call a judge. To call a judge, you'd say in that same scenario, you told the guy that he moved a little bit too further than he did, or that he didn't give you time to state something that an ability might trigger from your unit, and that they should go through those stages before they move on to the next model because it might affect them. And they start arguing, or they say, no, this has to happen first, and can't quite really get to a middle ground, that's when you would call judge. Or something like, oh, they did their psychic in their shooting phase, or they messed up some phases. Something bigger that will affect the game would also be a good time to call judge, and they will determine by looking over the thing, listening to both sides of the story, what should happen. And whatever a judge says, that is what is going to happen for that game. If you have any other ideas, a judge most likely, after they're asked that and they give their ruling, will go back to their area where all the information for the game is, or they'll go to their tournament organizer that might know more than them, and ask them basically about the rules of the game and like if that was the appropriate thing for it. And they'll usually, if something did change, they'll either text you through the app that you're using for your pairings, or they'll come up to you at your table at the end of the game and be like, okay, the actual ruling is this. So that's what we're going to talk about. Stop here for the do's of the event. So arrive early, meet the staff, keep care of yourself, keep your area clean and accessible, have all the things you need, learn your opponent's name, and just be general courtesy. And lastly, knowing when to call a judge and when not to. No one likes it when you're just constantly throwing your hand up calling judge. That just can get you in trouble. That can get a lot of people mad at you, and it just sucks the fun out of the game. But also, don't be the guy who's too afraid to call judge because you don't want them to get angry at you. It is your right, it is your opponent's right, and it is a observer's right to make sure that everyone's playing appropriately and having fun when needed. So we're going to move into our last section here of the do's and don'ts, and that is the don'ts section. Okay, so we are in the don't section of this video. So some of the don'ts that we have here on the screen are kind of a rough sort of thing, but can be a lot of common sense is in this sort of don't section of a lot of the games and going to an event. General rule of what to do in a public space, especially a lot of these places where there might be kids, is not on the list, but should be taken care of. Learning from when you get the information about where you're going to be playing and like kind of like the setting, the environment, like the part of the city where you're going to be going, who is going to be in it, where's the store, the event, advertised to, what sort of group will affect it. So if say you're a kid or you like a more family friendly area, but you go to say a more industrial section of the city where the game store is more for adults, or the working man, sort of the stereotyping of like a blue collar worker, that might not be your spot because they might have a lot of like maybe they might sell alcohol at the event, or there's a lot of swearing and jokes and stuff, and a more common group that might be not something for you. Whereas vice versa, say if you're a guy who's says a lot more edgier stuff, or his humor is a little bit different than most, and might want to have a fun, relaxing sort of beers and pretzel sort of event, going to a local in-city sort of by like a huge center where a lot of families might go, might not be the place to go for you too. But that's kind of just into the rambling for that. So no further ado, we will start with our list here that I got on the screen for you guys. And we got the first thing, which is the reverse of what we talked about. The first thing about do's is coming late. So if you're coming to an event early is really great because we talked about it again. But coming late is a issue a lot of judges and stuff deal with. So, and this doesn't even necessarily mean going physically being at the event. This could be dropping your list off late, or going to your rounds late, stuff like that. A lot of these times, if you do this, you're going to start getting a lot of your opponents mad. You're going to get the event organizers behind schedule, and you might even start losing points, or in the worst case, if you stop showing up to a few of your rounds, you might get disqualified. And a lot of these places, if you're disqualified, you lose your money, and you might get written up on the event as a person that has caused issues. So that's about it. So make sure you're at least there on time or a little bit early. Try to be on time. If, say, something causes you to be late, just make sure you let the organizer know why you're late, and try not to do it again if can be pleased. even if something worst case that you have to drop, just make sure you let them know as soon as possible. Because I know a lot of these apps or mental like organizing and stuff can be messed up if you just drop midway through something or before it, and they can't go back and fix things. Which, on the note for organizers, making some sort of list or keeping a note of what your player standings and the things and events that happened in games, and make sure you mark what rounds they're from, will definitely help you in case of a scenario like this. There's been a few times where I had to go back and rearrange people because people were dropping middle of the rounds, or people played around and they left for lunch and never came back, stuff like that. So make sure keep your documents safe is a great thing to have. So as we were talking about in the last one, how about listening to your judges and stuff, and we're going to talk about it. The second one is ignoring staff or customers. So a staff in this purpose is anyone who might run the store that you're playing in, or anyone running the event itself, and customers being people that are shopping in the location that you're playing in, or people that are observing. So ignoring them is a huge way to get yourself kicked out or not welcome back to events, or get you severe penalties on your matches. So if a staff member comes up to you or an organizer comes up to you and they ask you to say, hey, can you please slide your cases under the table, or can you please keep it down or watch what you're saying, don't brush them off and just continue what you're doing. Or if you're having an argument and they try to tell you a stat of a rule or something and you won't listen, take a breather. Or if your opponent's doing this, maybe this is not the person you should be playing with, and scoring their sheets appropriately, or writing a note on the back of the slip and you personally delivering it, stating what happened. If the judge themselves does not go up and talk to someone, is a great way to make sure that someone knows what's happened and that you just complete your game. Don't try to block them or get into argument with them. Just let the judges deal with it. And for judges who have to deal with this is why you have the TO. If you can't deal with it, or another judge can't deal with it, get the TO. And for a TO who can't deal with this, someone who's running the events, it is your right to be able to tell them that they're no longer welcome at the event if they have refused to listen to the judge a few times already, and for them to leave. And if you do this, usually a lot of the rule sets for these things like Pokemon Magic will state that your opponent who did not get told to leave will get the win. So that'll be like a 2-0 or win the game, so on and so forth, or a major victory for your different games. And on the same note with customers, it's as much as it is your privilege or right to play at that event because you paid for it and you're playing in it, is also the right of a person to go into that store during operating hours and enjoy their experience to shop and get around. So just be aware of your personal space, or if your opponent's not like pushing in their chairs and stuff or taking up too much space, or the case and stuff is just all over the place, just like give them a quick nod, be like, hey, there's someone behind you. Or if they just keep like throwing them off, or on another note, if say a little kid comes in and they get past a barrier, or in like larger events they have like ropes to block off areas so people don't walk in, it is also your right to tell like the kid like, hey, just be careful, buddy, like be really nice, it's a kid. Or get a judge to deal with it themselves, and just don't shout judge, like casually ask them to come over. Which then leads up into the third one we'll talk to, but also leads into the next one, which is taking up unnecessary space. So that's like just your case is flopped all the way open, you have foam all over the place, models kind of here and there, you're taking up like half to a full like 6x4 table to put all your stuff on, or you're covering half the board with your books, kind of causing your opponent not to be able to deploy there or take that spot. Basically kind of saying like, I am owning this spot, we're like, even if we roll off, I'm going to get this spot because my stuff's there. And this also applies to card games. You might think that a card game is small and takes little space, but you get people from time to time in stores and events where they'll just throw all their super hive on the table and all their deck boxes over. They'll move stuff off of tables that the store might leave there because they want to sell it, or they just don't have a proper spot to put it. So if you see something on a table that is for sale, or maybe someone was working on it, don't be afraid to go up to a store employee and and ask them where, if they can move it for you, or if there's an appropriate spot for you to place your stuff. Liquidy goodness. So next off, that leads into the last two, goes into this one, and this is the biggest one I probably have to say for a lot of store owners, especially small area. Like the store is really small, not necessarily the self is like the store itself is a small business, but like the building itself is small, and it's the sort of, this is my store, or this is like my basement attitude. So this is the sort of person you'll play against who thinks that because they play here all the time, and maybe an event like say another different game that they play takes over a weekend event or a weekday event that they usually go to, these are the sort of guys that'll have a hissy fit, or they'll be like, but what do you mean this event was here? It's like, so does that mean you guys aren't doing this event anymore, and stuff like that. That sort of attitude gets old really quickly. And for anyone who may have seen someone who has had this issue, or maybe even like felt it just for an instant, it's not your store, it's everyone's store. And in our first video, like we said, how to find information, this is a great example why you should double check and make sure you check social media in store about what's going on. And if there's a lot of places you're going to, and a lot of these people have that issue where, like, say you go in and you ask to play an event and a lot of people kind of like stare at you and give you dirty looks, or someone comes in and they complain that their thing's not going on, or this, even if worst case a store employee is not taking their time with you, or even if they don't give you, say like, hey, I'll be with you in a moment, I'm just finishing this, like grabbing these cards for this guy, it might not be a place for you. And your point of the event is you want to have everyone to have fun. It's everybody's store, it's everyone's event, everyone's paid an equal share into it, be it time or money. And we'll go into our last ones here, our last two that we talked about then in this video. It's going on 30 minutes, is aggressive behavior and brushing off instructions. So these kind of go hand in hand. Aggressive behavior being a little bit too into the game, or say you start smack talking your opponent a little bit too much, or a little bit of fun between lore and stuff, and being like, my Jace smashed your Gideon with the power of mind because he just muscle. That's some fun. But when you start throwing in some words, or say the person's getting like really passive aggressive about like you just saying how your rules work, or maybe yourself, like your opponent's being a really chatterbox and you're getting a little upset, kind of that sort of thing. Or in the worst case, your opponent starts actively screaming, or they start actually, like, maybe they bump something or they drop something and they just start swearing at you. This will get you, a lot of times will get you instantly thrown out. And if this happens to you, your opponent's doing this, being really aggressive, they're just straight up arguing the rules, call a judge right away, or even call, like, the judge will probably get them to leave or calm down the thing, kind of talk it over what's going on. And this is supposed to be a place for fun, not a place for arguing or fighting. So if you ever feel like sort of like you're getting a little bit annoyed by your opponent, or they're not actively playing right, or maybe they just keep forgetting rules and stuff and you kind of have to help them, ask a judge. Any of these things is the time to ask a judge, because it's better to stop the problem before it happens and escalates into something worse. And lastly, this might lead into the next one, which is brush off the instructors or instructions you receive from a judge. So say you're arguing about rules and the judge may have set a rules just to get it going again. Don't be the guy who fights the judge, because the judge has more power than you in this instance. And as a judge, don't be afraid to let your players know that you have the authority. Don't be right up in their face and be very toxic about it, but let them know that I'm, as you say, like, hey, I'm the judge for this area, how can I help you? Say, well, if the person keeps fighting you on a rule, you say, well, I said this rule, this is how we're going to play it. If you have a problem, I will go get the organizer. And at that point, usually players start to calm down, or even if the person keeps flipping out, the organizer comes over, and if the person doesn't listen to the organizer. Organizers, this is when you throw this person out, not literally, but like figuratively. You tell them to pack their stuff and leave, because we do not want this sort of personality in a place playing here, because it leads no fun for anyone. It gets other players riled up. It's late in the day, and this is just more like preventative maintenance in a sense for your event. So cutting off the problem before it spreads, because we all know what it's like to be in a long event where it's a weekend long. You've played like 6 rounds. This is like the 7th round on day 2, and you're super tired. Your brain's frizzled. Someone starts screaming across the room, and then your opponent kind of like feeds off of it, and then you feed off your opponent, and it just spreads. So don't be afraid to make sure your authority's known. Do whatever you need to do to put the point across that you're giving people warnings, and try to dissolve the situation before it goes any bigger than that. So with that, guys, we're going to end this video here. If you guys have any questions or concerns or any of your own ideas, leave them down below. And we're going to see, this is the end of the generalized videos for events. At the end of the days, you're probably going to get a final sort of closing ceremony where all the players will be asked to be to an area. This is where you clean up your stuff, help out if you want, get some brownie points, help out the judges and the tournament organizer, pack up stuff, make sure, double check you have all your stuff, make sure it's all okay. You listen to these closing ceremonies, because they might tell you about future events, or this is where they'll do the prizing if there was a prizing pool, things like that. Thank your opponents for games that you've played. Thank the judges and stuff for running this event. Thank the store if you're at a local store that opened up their doors to you, if you're like you yourself or your group of friends have been trying to get a place to play, and all that niceness. Be kind to your neighbors, be kind to your players, be kind to the store, be kind to the environment. Make sure you've left nothing behind and you cleaned up your stuff, got your prizing, and hopefully next time you've had a fun enjoyment and you'll be going to the next one. Or if you think you need more time, you'll take the break, play some more games with friends and other people at different stores, and then come back the next year. So with that, we'll see you guys in the next 2 videos where we go more in depth what to expect with certain type of game genres in a store. See you guys in the next videos.